The shirt Mara pulls over her head still carries the faint scent of detergent, a small reassurance in a morning already too quiet for comfort. She stands at the apartment window, fingers resting against the cold glass, watching the city hold its breath. Elias moves behind her, footsteps soft, careful not to disturb the tension settling between them like dust. He checks his phone again, though no new alerts have appeared. The last one, a terse government advisory, still lingers across the screen, its language clipped and unsettling, urging citizens to remain indoors until further instruction. The phrasing is deliberate, stripped of calm. They both feel it. Something has shifted in the world outside, even if no one can name it yet. A siren in the distance rises and falls, then cuts off abruptly, leaving a vacuum of sound in its wake. It pulls their attention tighter, binding them to the unspoken understanding that whatever normalcy they clung to yesterday has begun to erode. Mara steps back from the window, letting the curtain fall into place, as if that thin fabric could shield them from what's gathering beyond the buildings. Elias sets the phone on the counter, face down, as though the act can mute its authority. They share a look, not fear, not yet, but something adjacent, a quiet acknowledgement of the weight settling over their morning. Mara moves to the kitchen, opening a cabinet to check their supplies. The shelves are half full, stocked more by habit than intention. She counts cans, bottles, bags of dried food, her mind cataloging everything with a precision she didn't realize she possessed. Elias watches her from the doorway, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. The news last night had hinted at rising international tension, distant enough to ignore but close enough to disturb sleep. Now, in the heavy stillness of the morning, those late-night murmurs feel like warnings they failed to heed. A low hum vibrates through the apartment as the heater kicks on, but even that familiar sound feels fragile, temporary. Mara closes the cabinet and rests her palms against the counter. "We should be ready," she says quietly, though readiness feels like a luxury they haven't earned. Elias nods, stepping beside her. He doesn't touch her, but his presence steadies the air between them. The two of them, usually lost in the rhythms of work, errands, and small comforts, now stand anchored by the uncertainty tightening around their lives. They don't speak more of it. They don't need to. The first alert comes at 7:42 a.m., a sudden vibration that rattles the countertop. Elias flips the phone over and reads the message aloud, voice low. Unidentified disruption to global communications. Expect outages. Mara's breath catches. She imagines the invisible threads connecting continents, fraying one by one. Her mind fills with images she doesn't want, grounded flights, silent radios, half-spoken reports dissolving into static. Elias sets the phone back down, his thumb lingering on the glass before he withdraws his hand. Outside, the city begins to stir in strange, stilted movements. Mara returns to the window despite herself. Pedestrians pause at crosswalks, checking phones that refuse to load. Buses crawl along the streets, their headlights pale against the overcast morning. Store signs flicker as though uncertain whether to stay lit. Elias joins her, and together they watch a world attempting to continue its routines while sensing the ground shifting beneath it. A second alert follows minutes later, more direct, more urgent. Reports of coordinated cyber intrusions targeting infrastructure. Await further guidance. Mara feels the words settle inside her, cold and heavy. Elias exhales slowly, his breath fogging the glass. They both understand the implications, not through expertise but intuition. Whatever is happening is no longer theoretical. It is happening to everyone at once, rippling outward with quiet precision. Mara steps away from the window, her heartbeat rising. "We need a plan," she says, her voice thin but deliberate. Elias nods again, pushing himself from the glass. They gather what they think they'll need: flashlights, portable chargers, the small first aid kit tucked in a bathroom drawer. Each item placed on the table feels symbolic, as if they're preparing for an invisible test with no guarantee of passing. The ritual steadies their hands even as it tightens their chests. The power flickers at 8:13 a.m., a brief tremor across the lights, a shiver through the room. Mara freezes. Elias does too. For a moment, the apartment holds only their breathing and the faint hum of appliances clinging to life. The lights recover, brightening reluctantly, but the message is clear. Systems they've always trusted are beginning to falter. Mara feels a subtle shift inside her, something fragile breaking open. Fear isn't a sudden spike, but a slow, widening awareness. She sits on the edge of the couch, fingers intertwined, knuckles pale. Elias stands behind her, watching the lights as though he can will them to remain steady. Maybe it's temporary, he offers, but the uncertainty in his tone undermines the reassurance. Mara doesn't respond. She's listening to the silence between the sounds, the faint absence of traffic, the unusual stillness settling over the city. It presses against the windows, dense and expectant. At 8:27 a.m., the radio app on Elias's phone sputters to life, without prompting. A voice emerges, staticky and strained, repeating the same message. Maintain shelter. Avoid unnecessary travel. Continue to monitor official channels. The broadcast loops 3 times before dissolving into static. Elias tries refreshing the app, but nothing returns. Mara closes her eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of being instructed, but not informed. The city outside grows quieter. The usual mid-morning buzz fades into irregular bursts of movement. Cars accelerating suddenly, brakes screeching, distant shouts rising and falling. Mara feels an ache build in her chest, not panic, but anticipation of something she cannot name. Elias moves to lock the apartment door, the metallic click resonating through the room like a small, decisive act. Mara stands again, pacing slowly, her footsteps muted against the floor. "Do you think this is it?" she asks without turning. Elias hesitates, then answers carefully. "I think something's starting." The admission hangs between them, heavy and irrevocable. Mara turns to face him, searching his expression for steadiness. She finds it, but it's layered with the same quiet fear threading through her own thoughts. Outside, a transformer pops somewhere in the distance, a flash of dying light bouncing off nearby windows. Mara flinches. Elias moves to the balcony door, but before he reaches it, the city plunges into a sudden, unnatural dimness. The power grid reduces itself to a faint pulse, flickering in scattered pockets. Mara steps beside him, both of them staring at the half-lit skyline. In the muted glow, Elias whispers, "This is only the beginning." The apartment seems to shrink around them as the sirens fade, leaving only their shared breath, steady but strained, holding the fragile promise of resilience there. Rain hammered the cracked windows of the apartment as Maya pressed her forehead against the glass, trying to steady the tremor in her breath. She had spent the past hour replaying the broadcast that had shaken the city, each sentence echoing like a countdown she couldn't silence. The emergency alert hadn't revealed much, only that an unidentified strike had hit the eastern border and that all major cities were to remain on heightened precaution. But the uncertainty felt heavier than any definitive threat, and Maya sensed that something far more personal was unraveling beneath the official calm. Behind her, Daniel paced the living room with the restless energy of someone fighting an invisible clock. He moved between the sofa and the front door, checking the lock each time as though danger might slip through the cracks if he faltered even briefly. Daniel had always been the steady one, the quiet anchor in every crisis Maya tried to navigate, but tonight his shoulders carried an unfamiliar hesitation. When he finally stopped pacing, his voice cracked with the weight of a truth he had been delaying. "There's more happening than the news is saying," he murmured, avoiding her eyes. Maya turned slowly, her heartbeat sharpening as she studied the worry buried beneath his controlled composure. "You know something," she whispered, not as an accusation but as a plea for honesty. Daniel hesitated again, then stepped closer, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves were listening. "My brother called an hour before the alert. He said his unit intercepted intelligence about an incoming series of coordinated attacks, not just the one reported. He told me to get out of the city before nightfall, but then the lines went dead, and I haven't been able to reach him since." The words struck Maya with the force of a sudden plunge into icy water. She had met Daniel's brother only twice, but her memories of him were sharp. His conviction, his steady calm, and the fierce loyalty that made Daniel admire him. "If he warned you," she said, "why haven't we left?" Daniel exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though trying to dissolve a painful decision. "Because leaving means accepting that this isn't a false alarm. It means believing everything is about to collapse." Maya stepped nearer, the space between them charged with the tension neither wanted to confront. "Denial won't protect us," she said softly. Outside, distant sirens wailed, faint, directionless, like a warning struggling to find its shape in the storm-thickened air. Daniel flinched before he could mask the reaction, and the gesture revealed how deeply the fear had already rooted in him. Finally surrendering, he reached for Maya's hand, gripping it with a fragile mix of resolve and apology. "We leave at dawn," he said. "Not dawn," she replied. "Now." Her insistence startled both of them, but she didn't back down. The uncertainty had ignited something fierce inside her, a clarity she hadn't known she possessed until this moment. Staying meant risking becoming trapped, suffocated by the chaos slowly tightening around them. Daniel studied her face, searching for doubt and finding only the determination he had always underestimated. "All right," he said at last. "Pack only what you need. We move fast." The apartment felt suddenly smaller as they gathered their belongings, clothes, documents, a fading photograph of Daniel's brother, a flashlight that flickered when shaken. Every object seemed to whisper a farewell, a quiet acknowledgement that they might never return. As Maya zipped her backpack, she felt the growing pulse of a deeper conflict, one not between nations, but within Daniel. He was torn between fleeing and staying long enough to learn whether his brother had survived. She sensed the question haunting him, threading through every movement he made. The storm outside intensified, the wind pressing against the building as though urging them to hurry. When they stepped into the hallway, the lights flickered, casting long, shuddering shadows along the peeling walls. Each step downward echoed through the stairwell like an accelerating heartbeat. On the first floor, a power outage cut through the building with a snap, plunging them into near darkness. Daniel clicked on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom. As they crossed the lobby, the front door shuddered violently in the wind, its metal frame rattling like a warning. Maya felt a cold spike of dread as she reached for the handle, pausing just long enough to listen. Somewhere outside, beyond the storm, she heard a distant boom, soft, muted, but unmistakably artificial. Daniel stiffened beside her. "That wasn't thunder," he said. She nodded, gripping her backpack strap until her knuckles whitened. Together they stepped into the rain. The city streets were nearly empty, swallowed by shadows and fractured reflections of emergency lights bouncing against puddles. A police cruiser rolled slowly through the intersection ahead, its loudspeaker urging residents to remain indoors. Daniel pulled Maya beneath the overhang of a shuttered pharmacy, letting the cruiser pass without noticing them. "We can't go toward the main roads," he said. "They'll be monitored, maybe blocked." "So we take the back routes," Maya replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her tone. For the first time since the alert, Daniel allowed a brief, fragile smile. They moved through narrow alleys, weaving between overflowing dumpsters and abandoned delivery carts. The rain softened to a mist, but the tension in the air only thickened. Every distant flash of light made Maya wonder whether it was lightning or something far more deliberate. As they turned a corner, a sudden burst of static crackled from Daniel's pocket. He pulled out his phone, startled to see a single bar of signal flicker to life. A message appeared, fragmented, time-stamped 20 minutes earlier. It was from his brother. 3 words, "Don't trust anyone." The message froze both of them in place, cutting through the storm with terrifying clarity. Maya sensed that whatever lay ahead had already begun to reshape their fate in ways neither could escape. Danger was closing in. Maya felt the message burning against her thoughts long after the screen dimmed, its warning drilling into the fragile silence between her and Daniel. The storm had softened to a restless drizzle, but the world remained charged with a tension she could almost taste. Daniel stared at the fragment of his brother's final communication, his jaw tightening, his breath thinning into something cold and deliberate. She could see him assembling possibilities the way he always did, building logic from chaos, trying to anchor himself to reason while everything around them twisted into uncertainty. But no amount of analysis could undo the dread sealed inside those 3 words. They continued forward along the narrow street, careful not to draw attention to themselves as the city exhaled an uneasy quiet. Somewhere in the distance a siren rose, wavering like a warning that couldn't decide whether it was premature or already too late. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning rooftops and alley mouths, behaving as though danger had suddenly learned their names. Maya touched his arm, grounding him with a softness he didn't know he needed until that moment. "We keep moving," she whispered. "Standing still won't give us answers." They crossed behind a row of shuttered storefronts, their footsteps echoing through puddles touched by the weak glow of emergency lights. A battered delivery truck sat abandoned at the curb, its doors still open, its contents spilled like discarded fragments of a life interrupted. Daniel paused, leaning inside long enough to retrieve a small first aid kit before continuing on. The gesture was quiet but deliberate, revealing his instinct to protect even as fear seeped through the cracks of his composure. The sky above them pulsed with intermittent flashes, sometimes distant lightning, sometimes something else entirely. Maya felt each flicker in her bones, sensing that the city was shifting into a different rhythm, one guided by hidden hands. When they reached a narrow bridge overlooking the river, they stopped to catch their breath. The water below churned under the storm's remnants, carrying debris downstream like silent confessions. "We need a place to regroup," Daniel said. "Somewhere out of sight." Maya scanned the horizon, spotting a cluster of storage warehouses near the industrial district. Their small windows glowed faintly, hinting at backup generators or perhaps the presence of someone inside. "There," she said. "It's a risk, but everything else is exposed." Daniel hesitated, but the weight of unsaid questions pushed him forward. As they approached the warehouses, the air thickened with the scent of oil and rust, each breath sharp enough to sting. The largest building's door was ajar, swaying with the wind in a slow, unsettling rhythm. Daniel raised a hand, signaling Maya to stay behind him. He pushed the door open just wide enough to step inside. The space was cavernous, illuminated by a grid of flickering emergency lights that cast long, skeletal shadows across stacks of crates. Maya followed, the sound of the door creaking shut behind them echoing like a lock clicking into place. "It's empty," Daniel said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. They moved deeper into the warehouse, weaving between crates labeled with codes they couldn't decipher. The hum of a generator vibrated through the floor, lending the air a low, mechanical heartbeat. Maya crouched beside a crate, brushing away a layer of dust to reveal fresh fingerprints. She looked up sharply. "Someone's been here recently." Daniel knelt beside her, tracing the prints with a troubled expression. "Or still is," he murmured. Before Maya could respond, a sound sliced through the silence, a metallic clatter from the far end of the warehouse. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her behind a stack of crates as the lights overhead buzzed with a dying surge. They held their breath, listening to footsteps that grew steadily closer. A shadow loomed at the edge of the aisle, tall and deliberate, pausing as though scenting their fear. Maya felt her pulse hammer against her throat, each beat loud enough to betray them. Daniel squeezed her hand lightly, a wordless promise that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. The footsteps stopped. The figure exhaled, low and shaky. Human, vulnerable, frightened. "Is someone there?" a voice whispered. It wasn't threatening. It was desperate. Daniel stepped out first, hands visible, posture tense but non-hostile. Maya followed, her nerves coiled like a drawn wire. The figure turned toward them. A young man, drenched from the rain, wearing the uniform of a private security firm. His eyes widened with relief. "Thank God," he said. "I thought." He cut himself off, glancing toward the darkened loading dock. "You shouldn't be out here." Daniel stepped closer. "What happened?" The young man swallowed hard. "There were explosions near the power grid an hour ago. Communications went down." People started disappearing from the surrounding blocks. Not running, vanishing. No alarms, no struggle. Gone. Maya felt a chill ripple across her spine. Who is taking them? He shook his head. I don't know. But whatever's coming, it's coordinated. Daniel exchanged a look with Maya, confirming her fear that his brother's warning hadn't been metaphorical. The young man took a shaky step backward. If you have somewhere safe to go, go now. This place won't hold. A sudden thud reverberated from the far wall, followed by another, stronger, shaking dust from the rafters. The young man's eyes widened in horror. They're here. Daniel grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her toward the side exit, as the warehouse lights flickered violently. The thudding grew sharper, more purposeful, as though something enormous was testing the structure's resolve. The young man darted toward the generator, shouting at them to run. Maya turned just long enough to see him swallowed by the shadows. As she and Daniel burst into the rain-soaked night, the warehouse behind them shuddered with a force that split the silence open, revealing a truth they had tried not to believe. Whatever was happening to the city wasn't random chaos. It was the beginning of something designed. And they were already inside its reach.